Hey everyone, this is Module 3, Section 5, Ethos, Pathos, and Logos of Sharing the Gospel. And in the previous sections of this module, we walked you through some of the importance of listening well and asking good questions. You know, we tend to be so quick to explain and speak and preach to people that we forget that they tend to be their own best teachers when we just simply allow them to wonder or to ask good questions to them. And then as we listen, we find ways to give feedback or ask clarifying questions, and we reflect back to them what we heard them say, and then perhaps what we actually heard from God while they were sharing with us. But listening is something that we are not honestly that great at in our world. For the past couple of years, I have been a part of a group called the Fellowship of the Burning Heart, which is Richard Foster's son, Nathan Foster. He started this as a way to help train people to listen better. And so once a month, I meet with a couple other guys, and we have a basic script and format that we follow, but then there will be a portion where the floor is open for us to share some of our life with each other, both the challenges and the victories, and then with the other people in the group, they're listening as we're speaking. And when someone is talking, it then becomes my role, like I just said, to listen well. And then once they're finished, there's a point where we can then reflect back to them and encourage them and different things like this. But listening is so key in our world. But there does come a point where you have to speak, right? You have to tell people the story of Jesus. In Matthew and Mark, Jesus tells his disciples to go out and speak, tell, preach, and so much more, because obviously there is a verbal aspect of our work of making disciples that demands that we share. But how do we know what to share, how to share, and when to share? In this video, I want to give us just a framework for understanding what sharing the gospel actually means. Because for most of my life, I assumed that meant me standing in front of a large group of people telling them everything that I know about the Bible. And maybe that's a part of sharing, but sharing the gospel is actually a lot more holistic than that. In fact, it is so holistic that if we fail to understand what we are about to talk about in this video, then we will still be sharing a version of our gospel, whether we realize it or not, in the ways that I'm about to describe. And so we're going to talk about the ethos and the pathos and logos of sharing the gospel. So in the next couple of sections, you're going to be reading from George G. Hunter III's book, which is called The Celtic Way of Evangelism. And this is a really good book if you've never really dug into it much or know anything about St. Patrick and his impact that he had on Ireland. I encourage you to read that. So we only have a few sections that you're going to be reading in this course. You should, in fact, actually read the whole book because there's just so much to learn. And so I'll be pulling from some of the content in those chapters, but not all of them, so you still actually do need to read, by the way. But I want to attempt to help you see the value of these ideas from different stories, both my own and other people's stories, that will, I think, help you better understand these three ideas of ethos and pathos and logos. So just first, Aristotle believed that successful persuasion stemmed from three arenas that are always at play with each other. Ethos, or the character and credibility and the ethics of the speaker. The pathos, which is the emotions and the passions of the audience. And the logos, or the logic, the creative language, the evidence that is used in the message itself. And so these three arenas are constantly working either together because of the intentionality of the person who is trying to persuade, or they're working against each other because of the lack of understanding on the part of the speaker, right? So this is why I mentioned that you are actually speaking from each of these three arenas, whether you know it or not. Because each of them is always present in persuasion and talk. It's just simply whether you are aware of their presence and are utilizing them or not. Before we get too far into these three arenas, though, I want to mention why they are important for discipleship. It's quite simply because your ability to share the way of Jesus is not solely contingent on the words that you are using. More often it is contingent on your ability to understand how your life, how their emotions, and how the power of your words can shape the human heart. And most of the time we just miss all that. So let's dig in. First, ethos. When we talk about ethos, we're talking about the character and the credibility and the ethics of the speaker. That would be you in this picture. Aristotle said that basically ethos is the most important part of persuasion because it lays before other people the power of your life. What does that mean then? Aristotle identified 3 principles in the speaker's ethos that are always at play. First, your intelligence. And this may seem obvious, but in order to be heard by others, they need to at least perceive that you actually know what you're talking about. Right? In our modern world, people are just getting smarter and smarter and smarter. I mentioned in a different video that I have a neuroscientist, we have high-end software engineers and very successful people, business people in my church. And we live in a very intelligent city. And if I'm going to speak with any kind of authority to people, then they need to expect for me to be informed, knowledgeable, and competent. It doesn't mean that you have to know everything, but what you don't know, you must be willing to learn. So intelligence. The second principle is character. Sometimes we allow intelligence to be the end-all be-all to demand the respect and attention of others. However, it is not enough to simply know things. People need to perceive you as a person of good character, someone who is honest, virtuous, a person of integrity, because if they know that you're intelligent but you lack character, they'll never trust what you say, even if at times what you're saying is true or correct. And so character. The third principle is goodwill. This basically says that people perceive that you are for them. Where we live in Seattle, people have to know that you are for them before they will ever give you permission to persuade them of anything. This means that you are after their goodwill. We see street preachers all the time in Seattle, and most of the time they're standing in front of things like Planned Parenthood, yelling at people who are entering. Or they're reading about how damned all of you sinners are, and 99.99% of the time, the message will never get through because the perception for people in Seattle is that those kinds of evangelists are not about the goodwill of the people in this city. They are not ultimately for us. And so these are known as a person's intrinsic ethos. It's what people see in you as a person. But there's also extrinsic ethos, which asks a question: what is the speaker's reputation or the reputation of the thing that they are a part of? And see, people want to know that reputation before they allow themselves to be heard by you. This is, again, very important in Seattle. Seattle has been burned a lot by churches: Mars Hill, Eastlake Community Church, and just so many more. And generally, people are very leery of pastors or Christians for that reason, because the reputation of the church in Seattle is not very good. And so the ethos of the speaker is always communicating more than their words. In other words, people are going to allow themselves to be persuaded and influenced by you first and foremost based on your intelligence, your character, and your goodwill towards people. And I mean, that is huge. So the first arena is ethos. The second arena is called pathos and is generally referring to the emotions and passions of the audience. This is a really important arena because it assumes that we're not naturally gifted at inspiring people to action or toward a better self. When you think of some of the most impactful speeches throughout history, almost all of them inspired people to act, or inspired them towards calm or toward becoming a better version of themselves. It elicited an emotional response by helping people see the hope of a better, more perfect future. This means that speaking and discipleship, preaching, whatever context you are in when you are speaking to another person, is not simply just a passing of information from you to them. I once heard a guy say that all we should have to do is stand on a street corner and just read the Bible, because even the Bible says that it will not return void. In other words, what he was saying that all that we have to do to evangelize is read the Bible, and people are just going to be magically changed by it. The problem is that he never stopped to ask, is anyone actually hearing this? And not just hearing it because they didn't have a megaphone. That's not what I'm talking about. But is anyone actually in a place to hear and receive what you are saying? Now, God still expects us to understand the pathos of the people that we are with. We have to become aware of the things that will spark their imagination to see and believe that life with Jesus can not only change things, but will change them. And then he says, here's how. George Hunter III says that you cannot engage people without engaging their motivational and emotional agenda. And understanding how people respond emotionally and motivationally to the gospel will then help inform the final arena that we're going to talk about, which is the Logos. Now, I think that we are all very familiar with Logos in the modern Christian world. Logos means the word. And it has become the thing that we have attempted to perfect, especially in evangelical Christianity. But in the pursuit of perfection with the what of what we are saying, we actually have missed a huge portion of persuasion in and through Logos. See, Logos is not just simply the words that we are using, it's the idea of finding the right words in the right orders to create power and meaning. It's the how of our communication that we are talking about. See, the message itself, speaking to people, is to engage their imagination. You're helping them imagine the truth of what you are saying and how you say it or present it. And so how you present it is deeply important. And here is where we start stepping on some toes, right? Because Logos is not simply apologetics. Apologetics certainly engages the left side of the brain, the part that is typically more analytical. It likes logic and concepts and is rational, but it ignores the right side, which is where our emotions and imagination or art and music and poetry and more come from. This is where your understanding of a person or a group of people will aid in your ability to craft the Logos in such a way that will connect to who they are and how they perceive information. I just mentioned Seattle's a very intelligent city, but to dwindle this city down to simply an analytical, logical based group of people is highly misleading. As arts and music, poetry, emotions are actually the thing that really drive the people here. Which means for me, I have to think about speaking to both the left and the right brain people if I am going to have any kind of influence or have anybody hear me. See, and sometimes right-brained people will need things to be more logical, and sometimes left-brained people will need things to be more expressive and artistic. But this is part of the challenge of speaking to people so that they will then hear you. It's not limiting the method of your Logos to whatever you prefer. It's knowing that your people, it's knowing your people and discerning what will speak most clearly to them. One of the things I love about the chapters in the Celtic way of evangelism is when Hunter talks about the way that visual arts were a hugely important way for the Celtic Christians to understand the Logos, or the message of the gospel. Have you guys ever seen the Celtic cross? I'm going to put up a picture of a Celtic cross right here for you to see. But the tall cross with the circle intersecting illustrated creation and redemption. Or you can take the Celtic knot, and here's an image of the knot. The knot looks like this never-ending swirl of lines intersecting, which represents God's eternal protection over His people. See, the way in which you craft the Logos or the message is so important. If you preach, then you understand this well, right? But why is this important in discipleship? It's important because you are still communicating the greatest story to someone who will need to be able to hear it and begin to imagine themselves as a part of that story as well. And so this section has been all about the words that we speak and their effectiveness or not. And our hope is that you begin to see how it's not just as simple as downloading the information from your head into someone else's head. It's so much more holistic. And the message of the gospel starts with people seeing your ethos, your intelligence, your character, your goodwill. And then it's your ability to know deeply the pathos of the person that you are discipling, so that then you can help paint an image where the response is one of action. And then finally it's about crafting the logos, or the message, to be heard by the person that you're with. So this is certainly a lot of information and some big concepts, which is why the next 3 sections of this module will very simply be you reading from Hunter's book, The Celtic Way of Evangelism. And then a little later in this module, we're going to give you some practical tools for evangelism that you will actually put into practice in your context, wherever that is for you. And so there it is: ethos, pathos, and logos of sharing the gospel.